For more, we can go across to our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, Donald Trump spoke of what he called the American carnage when he became president. For many Americans, those words are now becoming a reality for Trump and his presidency, essentially.
Delana, you remember the line as well as any of our viewers. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. That was Donald Trump almost 3.5 years ago, January 20th, 2017, seems like a century ago, talking about really depicting America's cities as war zones. And the state of America today, perhaps in his critics' view, and even the people who perhaps give him the benefit of the doubt, say that the American carnage, if anything, now seems to be really picking up in earnest. You have a coronavirus pandemic, which has killed over 100,000 Americans. You have 40 million more Americans who have out of work, lost their livelihoods. You have entire inner city swathes of big cities in America across the country full of tear gas, up in flames, fire, cars, businesses being looted. He has reaped what he has sowed, in his critics' view. What's interesting here is we have heard people such as Atlanta's mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, basically saying that Donald Trump is making things worse, that the country right now, the U.S., is beyond really a tipping point in the country, and that his rhetoric is inflaming everything. And she has said, sometimes, why doesn't he just think of stopping talking? And it's really that you're hearing from a lot of Americans at a time when you'd think perhaps the president would step up to the plate and be seen as a force to heal, to try to bring an understanding, to try to bridge these awful divides. You have a president who is his default response has really been what it's been all along, since Charlottesville, Virginia, when he spoke of very fine people on both sides of riots that include a Nazi mob descending on the city. He is inflaming that rhetoric. And what's interesting is it's not just Democrats and it's not just the so-called liberals in the big cities, the anti-Trump people who are saying these things. Even some Republicans who have shrunk from any criticism of Donald Trump in the past are now speaking out. You've had some Republican governors saying things like, rather than trying to lower the temperature, to trying to assuage, to try to calm Americans, Donald Trump's message is escalating things. And that is really the default response. We heard the last guest talking about this. It's almost this divide and conquer approach to governance, not trying to heal, but by setting people against each other, he is pinning his hopes on knowing that he will have his people foursquare behind him. But right now, at this point, what Donald Trump is doing is talking about vicious dogs in the White House, ominous weapons that could be used against the protesters, and perhaps even suggesting looters could be shot at one point. Yeah. That is not doing anything to calm anything, regardless of what you think of the riots and the protests and whether they're justified at all.
Indeed, fanning the flames. Doug, I want to ask you, because the president is facing a dual crisis, because on one hand, he has a pandemic that has killed over 100,000 Americans, plus on the other hand, he has this policing crisis that's unfolding before our eyes. What sort of impact will all of this have on his presidency and his hopes for re-election?
You know, the question is fascinating and it's unanswerable in a sense, because you have a lot of people, especially outside the U.S., who look at what's going on and they would roll their eyes and say, how is it vaguely, remotely possible that a president such as Donald Trump, who has clearly bungled and botched the management of the coronavirus pandemic, practically denying it, then downplaying it, minimizing it after that, and now escalating his rhetoric and saying when the looting starts, the shooting starts, the way he's handled this crisis in the country, the worst civil unrest that the country has seen since the 1960s and the assassination of Martin Luther King. People would ask, how could he possibly be reelected? Donald Trump is savvier than you think when it comes to stoking division and perhaps even setting people rhetorically against each other. He believes he was elected on a law and order platform, and you do have a deep racial divide in America, a deep racial urban-rural divide, and even within cities between affluent, mostly white areas of many American big cities and lower-income, socially disadvantaged, more problem-plagued black areas. He is playing on those divisions and perhaps playing on the fact that some of the more affluent white voters, not all, of course, will look at what's going on and they will fear for their own safety. They will be amplified in their fears by Donald Trump's own rhetoric, presenting the rioters as your worst possible enemy, that black menace out there waiting to come to your neighborhood, to your house, to get you. it could play in his favor. Despite it all, the Democrats have a smaller room for margin for error in this election than you might think. Trump, some say, could do everything wrong and still get reelected. Joe Biden could have one gaffe, possibly two, and blow it all.
We'll see what happens. Thank you very much for that, Doug. Douglas Herbert there.